Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes, and we're doing our end of the year countdowns. Obviously, we had Perch on the channel yesterday. We did our top 10 comic stories of 2020. Today, I've got Joe Corallo on the channel. We're going to talk about the top 10 comic writers of 2020. I've got 5. He's got 5, and we're going to kind of lay it all out. Obviously, here with me to talk about this is a professional writer himself, a professional editor, award-winning editor at that. Joe, how you doing?
I'm all right, Wes. How are you?
I'm doing great. Enjoy doing these end of the year things, just kind of looking back and, rediscovering some of maybe, I read so many comics, you kind of forget some stuff, but we have some really, really great creators. Obviously, we got some chalk, some known commodities in the industry. We got some up and comers. I think we've got superhero writers. We've got pulp writers. We got noir, horror, everything, right?
Yeah. No, it's a good list.
All right, so mine is going to go five down to 1, but you're such a nice guy. You didn't want to objectify the writers. You just have your writers, and you're going to lead off here. So your first writer that you sent me is Kieron Gillen. Obviously, he is a indie comics darling. One of the guys, one of the creators that came out of the Warren Ellis, fan or message boards, and he's got Die. I believe that's from Image. It's like a Dungeons and Dragons role-playing kind of comic book. Once and Future, which I believe is like Arthurian kind of inspired series. And I never read Ludocrats.
Yeah, no, I'm blanking on all the stuff about Ludocrats, but I've been enjoying, in particular, Once and Future. That's Boom Studios. Dan Mora and Tamara Bonville are the art team on that one. And of course, Die. I want to say Stephanie Hines is the Hans. That's right.
Brilliant artist.
Yeah, I got to meet her at one of the last New York Comic Con that happened in person. But yeah, Kieron, I've been a fan of since his Journey into Mystery run. I've been following since then. He is a writer who really knows how to pick the artists for his indie books. He's worked with incredible artists that all fit the tone and the story he wants to tell. I think there's a lot of writers that go to a place like Image or work with smaller publishers, that just want to get the hottest artists they can on a book. But Kieron's work always comes off as something where it's like he really took his time to tailor a story to fit, the artists and the art team he's working with. And he's managed, despite a lot of heavy hitters like, Rick Remender, Hickman and others that were taking up, a lot of the space in Image, to, Brian K. Vaughan, to carve out a niche for himself with The Wicked and the Divine, and to then keep going. It's hard to actually find a ton of creators in the indie sphere that have multiple books that are in double digits in terms of numbers. And Die and Once and Future are both in the double digits at this point, So he's really, carved out a nice space for himself in the indie scene.
And he's one of those writers that can move between spaces. He can go and work at Marvel. Obviously, he did that with Darth Vader. Brilliant run. He's going to be doing that with, is it Eternals? I think he's working
Eternals, yeah.
on Eternals with Assad Ribic pretty soon. So,
yeah.
Ribic, my bad. And but no, he's a brilliant creator. He's one of those, he knows who his audience is.
Yes.
And he's brilliant at writing his story for his audience and delivering his audience what they want every single time.
Absolutely. No, he's really done a great job over the years, and seems like it's being rewarded with something like Eternals, which is a book that Marvel's clearly putting a lot behind. So, 2021 looks like it's going to be another good year for him.
Absolutely. So let's get to my list. I got number 5 on the list. People aren't surprised this guy's on the list. He's my personal favorite writer. I didn't want to put him too far up there. I put him at number 5. Obviously, he finished up his Hawkman series, which is just a wonderful telling of the character. It's too bad the sales weren't higher on that. He also had the only refuge from Brian Michael Bendis' Superman when he had those stories in the Superman Giants. They became Superman Man of Tomorrow in the DC Digital First. Has a very great feel for the character. Obviously, he had a little run on Justice League. He said he left that so he could take on his dream project, and he finished up Freedom Fighters in 2020. All very, very good stuff. The best way I can describe Robert Venditti, he's like, if there's somebody that's going to follow up on kind of like what Jeff Johns, Peter H. Tomasi, people who really understand the characters that they're working with and always never being stagnant, always growing the character and changing them, but it always feels organic to the character. That's who Robert Venditti is. He's a great action storyteller, but he always gets to the heart of the character, and that's probably why he resonates so much with me.
No, absolutely, and we've talked about Venditti before, about following him in the early Valiant days, the early reboot days, about almost a decade ago with Exo-Man of War, the Surrogates, books like that. He's been someone who was floating under the radar for many years, and then finally started getting some recognition. It kind of reminds me of Tim Seeley, who was another guy who was like plugging away with the smaller publishers for a decade or so before DC took notice of him and brought him on and elevated his work. So they have very similar, I feel, career trajectories, and it's really good to see that someone like Venditti has been valued by the larger publishers.
Now, we haven't heard anything as far as his 2020 plans for DC. We're expecting it's going to be JSA, but that hasn't been confirmed. But we do know he is going to be working with an old partner in Dinesh Shambasani and Warren Simmons. They obviously were the core of Valiant Comics when it relaunched. Robert Venditti was essentially their A-list creator. He was on the big book. He was the guy that was orchestrating all their big events back then. And he's going over Bad Idea. He's going to be doing Tankers, which is like men in mech suits fighting dinosaurs. Looks like it's going to be fun. Really wish I could get Bad Idea comics out here in the Philippines, but I guess I'll just have to read the reviews.
Yeah, well, I guess we'll see what the future Bad Idea is. Maybe they'll, update the distribution model at some point. So we'll see.
Yeah, really excited to see him working with those guys again, because as much as I love his work at DC and I love it, I still think his work on Exo-Man of War is even better. So
sure. Mm-hmm.
All right, so let's get to the next name on your list. We're still on the big names here. Tom Taylor, obviously, he's worked on indies. He's worked at Marvel. He's worked over at DC. He's definitely carved out his place at DC Comics with the Deceased universe. Obviously, that launched in 2019. 2020, we've got, I think it was Deceased Unkillables, which was like a prequel comic. We got Deceased Hope at World's End, which is a DC digital first that was kind of also not really a prequel. It was kind of slit in the middle of the original Deceased. But now we've got the sequel, Deceased Dead Planet. He also did Suicide Squad. And then at Boom, he's got Seven Secrets. I love his work on Deceased. And Seven Secrets is one of those things that people aren't talking about enough.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Deceased has resonated with a lot of people. It's gotten a lot of buzz. For an idea that, on paper, really felt like, oh, this is just going to be like Marvel Zombies again, or something like that. DC is late to the game again at something. But Tom's really, between that and, the Injustice series he was writing before that, has really carved out a deep enough carved out a niche here where he expresses a deep enough understanding of the DC universe to do all these kind of offshoots on the periphery while keeping the characters feeling like the characters they are. And then you've seen him play in the main universe with Suicide Squad, which, I really enjoyed his run on that. And now he's going to be taking over, Nightwing next year, which is that's huge. This is like going to be probably one of the first times, years that I want to pick up a Nightwing comic from issue 1 and not like bother waiting to hear sort of the feedback on it before checking it out.
Oh, I'm going to be all over that Nightwing comic. He's also one of the coolest, probably the coolest project I've heard announced from Marvel Comics in 2021 is going to be Marvel Dark Ages, which is, like a dystopian future. Right in Tom Taylor's wheelhouse. Not really a big fan of his work over at Marvel, but that's like right down my alley as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Like I think he's been a much better fit at DC, but maybe this is Marvel figuring out, oh, okay, this is how we use Tom properly. Let's have him do this, and this might end up being, his best Marvel work yet.
That's what I'm hoping for as well. So absolutely a great choice. He just missed out being in my top 5 personally. Now let's get to number 4. And the only reason Ram V is this low is that he didn't put out a ton of work. He did do his Justice League Dark work, but that was also co-written by James Tynion. When he finally got on Catwoman, I thought his issue number 25 was great. He elevated that series, but really the reason he's on this list is Blue and Green, his original graphic novel. I think he's being kind of pigeonholed as more of just like an horror creator, but he's really proven that he can write in all facets, including heroes or superhero comics, fantasy, things like that. Blue and Green was just really unexpected.
Yeah, I mean, Ram V is probably the greatest find that Vault Comics had last year with these Savage Shores, and has really shown that he's just incredibly versatile. Like you were saying, handling multiple genres, but the way he does it, I feel like we've all read stuff where you read it and you put it down and you're like, this person's like a fan of, Alan Moore and Neil Gaiman or something like this. But but it feels like they're trying to be those creators that are doing an impression, or it feels like, a clone, like we're on the 4th Michael Keaton in a Multiplicity type scenario. But with Ram V, it feels natural. It feels like, it's Ram V being Ram V and pulling this off, not so-and-so trying to be Alan Moore. So I really think Ram V is the type of creator to, keep an eye on, because as good as the stuff he's putting out now, his magnum opus might be a few years down the line and you don't want to miss it.
He is a relatively new talent. One of the ways I've described reading a Ram V story is, this one's kind of not nice, but Ram V is the writer Tom King wishes he was. And the fact that when I'm reading Ram V and the way that he's writing the stories, it's not just, pow, pow, action. It feels like I'm reading literature. Like he's telling a story, using comic books, but it just feels different, but it feels different in a good way. It's not a turnoff. It's just like, man, this is excellent. This is something that I want to see more of. And I think DC Comics is pretty smart to kind of try and get him into the fold this early.
Absolutely. There's a reason why I feel like they're making sure we know he's going to keep working there after Future State, and he is just one of those creators that I think helps to elevate the medium overall.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's get on to your list. You got another big name, James Tynion. He was number 6 on my list. He barely didn't make it in here, but talk about it's he or Donny Cates are the hottest writers in all the industry. He's got Batman. He's got Justice League Dark that he was co-writing with Ram V, who we just talked about. He's had some stories in Death Metal, Something is Killing the Children, which I personally think is his strongest work. Department of Truth, one of the hottest indie comics out there right now. He's also got his Tiny Onion Productions. He's got a lot of stuff. He's a very prolific creator.
Absolutely, he is incredibly prolific. It's nuts. When you see the kind of output he's doing, and he's been working at it for years. I mean, he's the kind of creator that everyone kind of talks about wanting to see more of. Where he started doing backups in Batman, Talon in the New 52, and spent years working his way up. He did Detective before he took Batman. I mean, this is the template of what a lot of people want to see in a creator, and he did it. And, whether people love his Batman or aren't as interested, you can't take away the fact that he started from the ground, worked his way up, and has demonstrated, similarly to Ram V, that he can also, have some versatility, tackle different kinds of genres. If Donny Cates is Michael Bay. James Tynion is Christopher Nolan. You know, in terms of like blockbuster kind of creators doing this kind of stuff, where you know, James, like with a book like Department of Truth, is, you know, trying to handle some pretty heavy kind of, you know, ideas and themes, but in a way that I think's easy to consume. And you know, there's a lot of value in that, and it's difficult to pull this off, and James does it in all of his, you know, works. So it's really impressive.
Also, another thing, I might be wrong on this, but what's the word? He's like a good soldier. If he's on your team, he doesn't have so much of an ego that he can't go work with other people, you know, and take the lead. And if you need him to take the lead, he'll do that as well. If you need to put him on Batman, he'll up the sales. But you're right, he's versatile and he can play nice with others, and that's always important.
Absolutely, he does play nice with others. He definitely he doesn't try to outshine everybody. He's there doing Batman, but he never puts himself above everyone else. He's never come off with this attitude of like, DC should thank me for saving this and that. Like, he's a humble, sweet guy, very personable in person. You know, he's great at shows. He's enthusiastic without it coming off like a jerk. You know, he doesn't come off fake. He comes off like he's just genuinely excited to be doing what he's doing. He never tries to tell you like this is the greatest Batman's ever been, and DC's, you know, like he doesn't do that, and it's nice.
And he's promoting smaller creators. He's taking his platform that is growing, obviously, he's getting more notoriety. Batman sales rep. He's got some big launches, but he's got his little, was it razor blades, where he's taking short stories from up and coming creators and giving them a voice, giving them a platform. He doesn't need to do that. He's likely doing it all out of his own pocket. You know, who knows if he makes a little money on it on the side, but you know, he's going out there and giving other people a shot, and that's admirable.
Absolutely. No, it really is. You don't see that enough.
Absolutely. So getting to number 3, we just talked about him. On my list, it's Donny Cates, and right now he's got Venom, Thor, King in Black, Redneck crossover. I think he's got a couple more indie titles maybe out there that he was producing in 2020, but I don't know. If you just like pound for pound producing a lot of content, which Donny Cates definitely does, just being very steady and very high level, you know, you probably can't beat Donny Cates in the industry right now. His Venom, obviously, Venom isn't like a flagship character for DC or for Marvel Comics. Neither is Thor, but those are 2 of their 3 highest selling ongoing comic books. That's insane that he's doing that at the same time. Obviously, King of Black is the biggest, most highly anticipated Marvel event of the year. And then, you know, crossover, I think it did 150,000 issues shipped on issue number 1. Brand new IP. No characters know. Insanity.
Yeah, Donny is one of the few writers right now who can sell a book because his name's on it. It's very rare to get that lately. But he can do it. He's got a very bright future ahead of him at Marvel. I feel like he's in a position where he can kind of pick and choose the trajectory of his working titles there, you know, coming up.
Definitely feels like he's got his choice of artists now too. Every time he feels like the art level is always going up.
Absolutely. I mean, and I've been following him since Buzzkill at Dark Horse, which was a fun little book about like a superhero who only has powers when he's drunk. It's a fun book. If you've been enjoying Donny at Marvel and you haven't gone and checked out some of the backlog, I definitely suggest that. I've read Redneck as well. You know, he's doing interesting things, but he's doing it in a very like again, it's like a mainstream.
Very consumable.
It's consumable. It's accessible. You know, like King in Black very much feels like a blockbuster sort of movie. If you like a Transformers, an Independence Day, like that kind of thing. you know, and that's hard to pull off in comics. Either people don't push hard enough, or they get too caught up in their own pretension to tell a cohesive story. But Donny's done a very good job at sort of being able to balance that and putting out these sort of accessible, big stories.
He's very good at taking very big ideas and presenting them in easy to ways to understand them. Now let's get back to your list. You've got a couple of lesser known creators here that we're going to talk about here at the end. The first one is Zac Thompson, most notably known as like one of the writing pairings with Lonnie Nadler. They've been very prolific over the last few years. I wasn't a big fan of their Bloodshot. Doesn't sound like that was their problem or their fault. They are getting more work at the big two. Obviously, he did Web of Venom, The Good Son, which was leading into King in Black, which actually told a pretty important story about Dylan Brock. But he's also just so much work on the indies.
Oh, yeah. Him and Lonnie together did Come Into Me a few years ago at Black Mass Studios, which is where I really got to know them. I was really impressed by that story. And then Zac wrote The Replacer, which was a graphic novella through Aftershock that came out last year. It's like it's a horror story. It's deeply personal to him. Definitely, I strongly encourage people to hunt that down and check it out. I think it's really important work. We've talked a lot about, people like Ram V doing horror, but Zac also, he does horror really well, but it's a different kind of horror. Like him and Ram V aren't taking sort of the same space. There's a lot of room to tell different kinds of stories, and they're telling those different kinds of stories. And then this year, I mean, you had No One's Rose, Lonely Receiver on the indie side, No One's Rose at Vault, Lonely Receiver at Aftershock. And Lonely Receiver to me feels a lot like a spiritual kind of successor to something like Come Into Me. It's, I don't want to say it's like Her, that movie with Joaquin Phoenix exactly, but it's that kind of theme of like creating your own, partner. There's a lot of horror elements to it. It's really well done. I'd put Lonnie on the list too, but Lonnie did Black Stars Above that started last year. It might have ended the beginning of this year. I'd have to double check. But Lonnie has quite a bit planned for 2021, same as Zac. So definitely look out for both of those guys next year.
Absolutely. If you go and you look at their biographies, there's no work, and all of a sudden, boom, they were just working everywhere. So it's nice to see that they've been making their impact, and I imagine we'll be seeing them more and more at the big two coming up.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
So let's get into my number 2. It is Ed Brubaker. He has not had a prolific year, but he did have Pulp, original graphic novel, with his creative partner Sean Phillips. Also, he ended his criminal series. We finally saw The Death of Teague Lawless, also with Sean Phillips. I don't know. Is he the best comic book writer, just period?
Maybe. It's tough because like
he's very niche oriented. He is mostly in noir, pulpy type of stories. But even when he was on Captain America, it's like he can do superheroes too.
Oh yeah, and that first volume of his run, that omnibus, is being re-released next year. So if you didn't pick up that omnibus and you wanted it, it's going to be available at reasonable prices again next year. But with Brubaker, he's such a force in crime and noir. It seems like he's the guy. It's very rare to find anyone in comics like there's no one in superheroes or even horror where it's like, oh, you like horror? Here's the one guy. Or the one person that does this. But when it comes to, if you go to any shop or ask anybody, oh, I want to get something like kind of pulp noir, something like a crime kind of comic, what should I get? Every single person will tell you got to pick up an Ed Brubaker book. There's no one else they're going to say before Ed Brubaker.
Yeah, he's absolutely a force of nature. And Pulp was such a cool. It felt like, oh, is he doing a Western comic? No, kind of. There's certainly some Western elements in it, but it turned out it was, it's a straight up crime noir comic, and it was a great story about an outlaw at the end of his days, and he one last opportunity to maybe get some redemption in his life, and just very well executed. I wish we got more pages out of Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips this year, but I think they have a new series starting here at the end of the year. Or maybe it's a new OGN.
I believe so. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So just he's literally perfection when it comes to his craft, when it comes to his style, when it is crime noir. Now let's move on to your last selection. This was a little bit of a wild card. I know the name. I haven't really read many of his comics, but you said Elliot Rahal. I know he used to be like a comedian, but I haven't really read a whole lot of his comics.
Yeah, he's an up and comer, sort of in the same vein as someone like Zac Thompson, where a lot of his stuff is through places like Valiant, Aftershock, Vault. He had a cult classic at Vault, which he's done a few times. There's a couple of volumes of that. Bleed Them Dry was his latest thing from Vault this year. The Vein at Oni Press. Knock 'em Dead at Aftershock. Like, this is a prolific guy who's putting out a lot of stuff at multiple indie publishers. If you look, I mean, this whole year, like, every month he's had like something coming out from somewhere. This is a really prolific guy. Hot Lunch Special was another one at Aftershock. That was another like personal story for him to tell. Bleed Them Dry and The Vein are vampire related stories. The Vein is more of a period piece. It's takes place in the 40s. Knock 'em Dead is about doing stand-up at and stuff happens.
Certainly something that you would know about, right?
Yeah, it's Knock 'em Dead is this guy who does stand-up, something crazy happens, and now this is going to affect him, going forward. I just didn't want to spoil it because it was one of the most interesting comics that I read this year. The first issue of that, I wasn't expecting it. But yeah, he's full of surprises. You want to sort of check this guy out because, again, he's a rising star. Might as well know him before he's doing stuff, at the big two.
So, like I said, he used to be a stand-up comedian. Not all of his stories are like comedy, right?
No, not at all. He's he has these gritty, sort of real kind of stories. This isn't. It's not the kind of stuff where you think like, oh, he's just constantly going to try to be funny or obnoxious or something like that. He's telling all sorts of stories, also very versatile. There's a lot of horror and what he's doing. Like he's definitely someone to check out.
Absolutely. So let's get to my number one. If you've been following the channel, I think you probably could have guessed it. Chip Zdarsky. He's had the best ongoing superhero comic, in the industry this year, easily with Daredevil. He had one of the best miniseries in X-Men Fantastic Four, one of the highlights of Dawn of X. His Invaders miniseries got not nearly enough love. He had the best comic story in Detective Comics 1027 and a big anthology with a lot of big-time Batman creators. And he's got a nice independent comic, Stillwater, coming out right now. Not the most original premise in that one, but it's still definitely worth your time. It's a well-constructed comic book, but he's I don't know. He's just as consistent as a James Tynion or Donny Cates, but I feel like he has more highs.
Yeah, no, that's possible. That's an argument I think worth having. I think what really surprised people is how versatile he was, because when he started with things like Sex Criminals and sort of his online presence basically being very humor focused. Yeah, I think it made people think like this is like a comedy guy, and like, oh, it'd be cool to just have him on stuff like Howard the Duck and like do comedy stuff. Maybe he'd be good at like Deadpool. But then I think he really blew people away when he started doing stuff on like Spider-Man. I mean, Spider-Man Life Story is one of my favorite things from last year. And then, Daredevil, just the trajectory he's been going. I don't think people, thought he was this kind of creator. He might be the single most versatile creator on this list, despite the fact that a lot of these are versatile creators because of his ability to go from something like Sex Criminals to Daredevil. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people are already fans of him and are aware of the different things he's been working on. But like, I mean, if you're not, what are you waiting for?
Absolutely. I wish he took himself more seriously. Like I said, he kind of has a Tom Green persona.
Yeah.
But he's a big time creator. He's, Marvel had him locked up in an exclusive. Obviously, he isn't anymore. He's going to be writing the premier title on Batman Urban Legends. He's got work in Batman Black and White. So he's taken on some of the darker material over at DC. Nice to see him expanding out there. He's already arrived. Like, his Daredevil is amazing. He's written the best issue of Spider-Man probably in the last 8 or 9 years, was Peter Parker's Spectacular Spider-Man 310. His Marvel 2-in-1. I'm still beside myself that he didn't relaunch the Fantastic Four, because his take on 2-in-1 was so just brilliant. It was perfect.
No, absolutely. I really liked 2-in-1, especially earlier on. But yeah, he did such a great job with that.
So definitely excited to see him do more work at DC Comics. Hopefully he gets even more profile work. Definitely want to see him keep on with Daredevil. It's going in a very interesting direction. So those are our top 10 comic writers of 2020. I think we had a great list. Thank you so much for joining me today, Joe. Obviously, you are a comic writer and an editor, but I could not put you on the list because we're friends.
No, of course. And, I wouldn't have put myself on the list anyway. Don't worry about it.
Well, you are very a talented man, and you're very thank you so much for all the information and the great takes here today. And we'll definitely see you back here on the channel doing some more of these year-end wrap-up lists.
Well, thank you, Wes. It's been great. And I hope some of you people, if you haven't heard of some of these people on the list, that you check them out.
Absolutely.